Good afternoon, everyone. I assume we're going to wait just another moment, Naila, to get started.
That is correct. Yeah, we'll give it another second or two, just waiting for some more members to join.
Heidi, I owe you a response to an earlier message. I will get back to you. It's Monday, right? And Monday post-holiday, my goodness. That doesn't mean I didn't talk to Naila 15 times today.
But I would have expected like 20, Eddie. About how many do we have almost all? Yeah, we don't have enough yet to start the meeting, so we'll give it a few more moments. Who has the phone number ending in 550?
That's Sheila Wright. Hi, Naila.
Hi, how are you?
How was your holiday?
It was very nice, thank you. How was yours?
Good, good.
We're going to get started just in one moment, waiting for just a couple more people to join so that we are sure we have a quorum.
Okay, no problem.
County Executive Budish, how are you, sir? Good.
I'm doing good. How are you, Eddie?
Doing well. Thank you, sir.
Good. Hope you had a good holiday.
Yeah, it was pleasant. Yep. But
Good.
you know, I say that because I'm not the one who did the cooking, so it was pleasant.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's about 3:03, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. I see based on our Zoom call, I believe we do have a quorum. So I'm going to start with roll call. Eddie Taylor. Okay, you're on mute, but you're here.
Yeah, here.
Danielle Sidnor. Stephen Cavanis.
Here.
Heidi Gullett.
Here.
Randall McShepard.
Present.
Habiba Grimes.
I'm here.
India Pierce Lee, I believe she's going to join us closer to 3:15, 3:30. Phyllis Harris.
Here.
Reverend Kenneth Chalker.
Here.
Rabbi Joshua Caruso.
I'm here.
Levine Ross.
I'm here.
Yanela Sims.
Here.
Victor Ruiz. I see you, but you're on mute, Victor. Just wave. You're here. There you go.
Sorry, here.
Marsha Maccabee. Sheila Wright.
Here.
And Cordell Stokes and Janice Contreras are both excused for this meeting. I'll begin with a moment of silence and reflection. I'd like to take a moment to reflect upon the roughly 25% of Cleveland Municipal School District kindergartners who have at least one blood test revealing elevated blood lead levels. According to a report published by Case Western Reserve University in 2019, children in neighborhoods with poor housing stock were disproportionately affected with lead exposure. The study revealed higher elevated blood level proportions are observable among children on the eastern side of Cleveland, and lower rates are observable among children on the western side of Cleveland. Based on demographic data, the differences in elevated lead blood levels are clearly tied to racial disparities. Lead exposure is concentrated in areas of disinvested neighborhoods, historically tied to segregation, redlining, and subprime lending. The lead crisis is affecting our Black children in a much higher number than our white children. The Case Western Reserve University study also confirmed negative conditions associated with lead poisoning follow these children into adulthood. Elevated blood lead levels lead to a host of harmful outcomes for young people in education, behavior, and health. These downstream consequences can also include increased involvement with the juvenile justice system, adult incarceration, reliance on public assistance programs, and homelessness, according to the study. Let's take a moment of silence and reflect upon these students with elevated blood lead levels in our community. Thank you all. I also want to note for the minutes that Marcia Maccabee has joined the call. Welcome, Marcia. I'll move now to the public.
Thank you.
I'll move now to the public comment section. Since our last meeting, we received one additional public comment, which was submitted via the email to equity@cuyahoga-county.us. I forwarded the email to the case members on this call, all of the case members. As I mentioned, and I'd just like to spend a moment to reiterate, and I said this during our last meeting, members of my staff acknowledge receipt of each and every comment received via return email. And for those who request a meeting with this council, Chair Taylor and I meet with each and every individual who requests a meeting. So as is our protocol, my office sent an email acknowledging receipt of the public comment we received, and a follow-up discussion with Chair Taylor and I is planned with the organization referenced in the email. I'll now ask our county executive, Executive Budish, would you like to open the meeting with a comment or two?
Sure, Nayla, thank you. Thanks, everybody. I hope you all had a good and safe Thanksgiving. I think we can all say it was different than other Thanksgivings that we've had. You know, these are tough times, and, you know, it's hard on all of us. We try with things like Thanksgiving to create some sense of normalcy in the midst of what's really been a crazy, difficult year. This Thanksgiving, I took time, as I always do, to consider what I'm thankful for. And I have to say, one of the things is this commission and your efforts. It's a great group of people, and I know you're working hard. It's one of my great interests to see us truly make a difference addressing structural racism in the community. And I have great confidence in this group and the work that you're doing. So I'm very grateful for that. You know, we can't make change unless we take a hard look at what is going on, both in the county government and in the county generally, to know what we're doing, what we need to do going forward. And, you know, that's what you're doing. I know that's what you're doing. And I'm looking forward to hearing your subcommittee reports today and other updates as you continue to go forward. So I just wanted to say thank you, as I did privately over the weekend. I want to say thank you publicly to all of you for what you're doing. Thanks, Nayla.
Thank you, Executive Budish. Appreciate that. Chair Taylor, would you like to address the council and perhaps provide an update on your recent presentation to county council members at their November 17th, 2020 Human Resources Appointment and Equity Committee meeting?
Thank you, Naila. I do appreciate it. I'll spend just a few moments talking about those things, because the critical thing today is to leave enough time for us to have a thorough set of conversations around all of the subcommittee efforts that have taken place to this point. Lots of good work. You know, it may be the time now to feel a little bit of anxiety, but because we have a report that's due within the next 31 days, we'll call it, at least the first attempt at a report. We know that this work will continue. And as I've described in many cases, this work will be perfected over the course of time. It won't ever be perfect, but we will continue to strive to make it better as we go. So once again, I'm grateful for all the meetings. I think we're now approaching nearly 30 meetings which have occurred with county personnel and folks outside of the county. I know that we put countless hours into our committee meetings aside from those interviews. And as Naila said, we've taken a number of discussions with just concerned community folks who have a keen interest in this work. So the report to the county council committee reflected some of the things I just said. A series, more than a few dozen interviews with folks, the times that we've talked amongst ourselves, the findings that we've come up with, at least on a preliminary basis, the beginnings of the work with Dr. Hoffman and Heidi, of course, contributing to this effort, and then so many other things from a communication standpoint, and then the one-off conversations that have taken place. I've said it now almost ad nauseum, couldn't be prouder of the efforts that this group has put together to this point. So that anxiety that I speak of gets back to now we have to begin to reduce some of these things in our minds to writing. I would say to us all, because there's so much information. This first report, and we'll talk about it more, this first report should just really be an overview of all that we've discovered, or most of what we've discovered. We may have some findings here or there, but know that over the next several months, our understanding will grow, the words will be made better, and I think the recommendations, and this is taken directly from our Chantel Brown, the committee chair of this Human Resource Committee, let's aim big. Let's shoot for change that is meaningful, that deals with the structural issues, and might represent forever better outcomes when it's all said and done. So we shouldn't limit ourselves to just what's before us. If we can think beyond that, I think we should do exactly that. Of course, some of these things are limited by resources, but why not give the county executive what it is he's asked for, make the kind of change that we can all be proud of that's lasting. That's it for me. So anything that I may have missed there, Naila?
No, thank you very much, Eddie. I'll move along. Just to wrap up some of our unfinished business and specifically regarding our bylaws. Prior to today's meeting, the bylaws were circulated to the council members for their review and comments. During the November 2nd meeting, Ms. Nelson Moore, our attorney, was asked if the bylaws had to be ratified during a public meeting. She did advise that the bylaws should be accepted via motion during a public meeting. Ms. Moore was also asked, or Ms. Nelson Moore, excuse me, was also asked if county council appointees are available for reappointment, and she advised the council appointees are eligible for reappointment if they express a desire for continued service. I will be reaching out, and I've reached out to a few of you who have a one-year term and to find out if you are interested in being reappointed to an additional 3-year term. Language regarding reappointments has been incorporated into the bylaws that you all received. Is there any discussion regarding the bylaws? I'm assuming we've all had an opportunity to review them. So is there any discussion regarding them?
You
Randall.
probably can guess that I have.
Right. I was waiting for your picture to appear, quite honestly.
Yes. I did have a couple of questions, comments. Shall I just?
Yes, if you can, Councilman McShepherd, because we do have our attorney, Andrea Nelson Moore, is also on the call, so she's prepared to respond to your comments and questions.
Okay. I guess, Counselor, I would ask that if you would turn to page 2, the top of page 2. Item number 5 and item number 7 seem very redundant. I didn't really understand the difference in the two. One is make recommendations and provide input to the executive and council regarding the development of equity goals, strategies, and programs. And 7 is provide the executive and the council with status reports periodically. I wondered if those could be blended in some way, because it's sort of, you're updating them, the council and the executive. I would imagine that status reports would include development of goals, strategies, and programs. So I would suggest that we maybe take a look at that just to see if that could be blended into one statement.
Well, maybe let's see if we can do that now for does the rest of the committee agree, just so we can finally get these bylaws passed, hopefully. Andrea, do you have any suggested language, or do you believe that they're different? Because my read is that they're somewhat different, but if they're not, I will of course defer. So Andrea.
So I believe there's definitely overlap. And I don't see why we cannot update the language to reflect and combine the two. unfortunately, I was not part of the initial team members. So Nayla, do you recall what you had spoken with prior council as to why those two were broken out? But I don't see why it can't be.
I have a quick suggestion, Nayla. I know you want to move quickly on this. Why don't we just say, provide the executive and council with status reports and make recommendations, blah, 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 with the rest of number 5.
That's totally fine. Sounds good to me. What do the others on the call believe? Just nod head. Thanks.
I'm fine with that.
That works for me.
All right, let's do
Okay.
that.
And then number 6 there, I thought read a bit, could read a bit differently. It says meet publicly on a quarterly basis to provide a forum for the public to offer ideas and recommendations regarding equity. This just may be my opinion, but it seems to me that we might say that our objective is to meet publicly on a quarterly basis to conduct case business and provide a forum for the public to offer ideas. Because we're not just meeting to offer a forum for the public, we actually have business to take care of as a case. So
I think that's fine. And Andrea, just to answer your prior question previously, prior council got these straight from the ordinance, the enabling legislation as our duties and recommendations. But I think that's a perfect fix to add in what Councilman McShepard suggested. All in agreement?
I have
Thumbs.
I have a question. Randy, do you consider the emails that are read as public input? Because I don't think we've had a public input process up to this point. Or is that what we're looking to do in the future?
I think that's another question that I do believe comes up on another page under meetings, but I don't know if anyone wants to answer that question.
Well, public input is sort of replete throughout what we're doing, right? It's the stuff we've done with the community boards. It's the invitation that everyone has to offer input on a day like today where it's public record. And Phyllis will talk about this, it's the website that has gone live, and Victor, will go live and provide the opportunity for input. So when I say replete, I think it's strewn throughout all that we're doing to allow the public to provide input, unless you're referring to something different.
No, because Randy said, and to conduct case business. So are we going to be doing, I just see those as two separate things.
Yeah. Well, I think what Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, Randy, I think what you're saying is we have this and that to do, right?
Yeah.
It's the
functions and duties. It's the functions and duties section of our bylaws.
Right.
So nowhere else do we say we're actually coming together to actually conduct the business of case. Right. And the way it reads now, it almost seems like we're only coming together to provide a forum for the public. While that is true, and while we should always engage the public and hear their ideas and get their input, we're formed as a body to actually do or conduct business. So that was just my point, that it seemed like.
Yeah, I think the conjunct, I think it's appropriate because we're doing both. So adding that slight change is meaningful and makes sense in my view.
Okay, and then sort of along the lines of what Victor was asking on page 4, under quorum and under regular meetings, there's reference about unless state legislative action permits virtual meetings as attending virtually. Did we ever get official confirmation that virtual meetings were covered under sunshine laws?
Yes, we did. Oh, Andrea, would you like to? I think I sent you that House bill that just passed.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So during the last case meeting, I believe I mentioned that House Bill 197 had been passed by the Ohio legislature that permitted virtual meetings up through tomorrow, actually, December 1st. But since the governor has issued another executive order. The legislature has in fact met once again and passed House Bill, I believe it is 404. Yes, House Bill 404, and it extends the time in which public bodies may hold and attend virtual meetings up through July 1st of 2021. So yes, we did get confirmation that the Ohio legislature has in fact authorized said virtual meetings.
So do we still need to have language that says unless state legislative action permits virtual meetings? Is that no longer valid?
I believe that it is still valid because we don't know what's going to take place in the future.
And if you recall, Randy, I believe this was language that was requested by the committee to be included during one of our discussions. And as Andrea said, we don't know if this is going to be extended by the governor or not. So I would recommend keeping it in. But I, of course, will defer to all of you.
Yeah, I thought we asked to put that language in there because we didn't have anything to go by. Now that there's been an ordinance passed.
No, there was always an ordinance. Okay. Yeah.
But no big deal. I mean, you know, I certainly won't lose sleep.
Okay.
The main point is that we're covered. We have state clearance to have these meetings, and we're not infringing on the sunshine laws in any way.
Correct.
Okay. And I think I only had one other.
Randy, while you're looking, I think your point is, I think the legislation says we have to meet in person unless, right? So that's because we prefer it to be an or, right? We can meet this way or that way, but I think it's we have to meet in person unless we're provided by ordinance to meet virtually. So that's
correct. That's correct.
Okay. My last question is on page 6 under membership, section 2. The third item says working groups, standing committees, or subcommittees may also engage members of the public. My question was, are we able to engage members of the public as sources of information or as potential committee members, subcommittee members? What do we mean by engage?
That's interesting. And you'll have to correct me, folks. I don't know that we can add members, subcommittee or otherwise, without some council or approval or county executive nomination. In other words, our 17 are our 17. Can we add another 17 and have them perform in subcommittee roles? I don't know that we've been given that ability. So I think they're just engaged for the sake of input, quite honestly, rather than a committee or formal committee or subcommittee level of participation.
Okay, it was just the fact that it was under membership. I wasn't quite clear on that, but that's fine.
Well, correct me for the lawyers on the line, please.
No, I believe your interpretation is correct, Chairman Taylor.
Okay. All right. So we want as much engagement as we can. We just, there's no formal title, if you will. They can perform this working group level of input, but we can't call them committee or subcommittee members without some other vote, I imagine.
Chair Taylor, I know we need to move on. I just had one inconsistency that I noted.
Okay.
On page 2, under Article 2, Section 1, it says Cuyahoga County Council President may appoint the county executive shall appoint 15 county residents. But if you look at the qualifications on the Cuyahoga County website for our case subcommittee, it says that it's not required to be a resident of the county. So that was inconsistent language between the bylaws and what was listed as the qualifications. And in some cases, there are requirements for county residency for certain subcommittees or committees at the county level. So I just wanted to make sure they're consistent between the two.
So Dr. Gullett, thank you for that. Is the executive still on the call? Oh, there you go. Do you want to speak to Dr. Gullett's concerns? Do you want to speak a little bit to Dr. Gullett's concerns about the
Sure.
inconsistency? Thank you, Armin.
Just the history is that when the legislation was first proposed and passed, it said county, it said, I forget what it said, county citizens or something like that. No, what was the original language, do you recall? Just said, I think 15 citizens or something
I
like that.
think it said county citizens. I think you're right.
Something, anyhow, it didn't specify that they had to be residents. Then the county council amended it, adding the 2 other members. In doing that, they also changed the language, I think, inadvertently, adding resident instead of the language that was in there. So it became resident. Knowing that that was happening, I consulted with council leadership and staff because I believe we have 1 or 2 members that are not residents of the county. And what we decided we would do is, at least for the moment, make the appointments before the amendment was passed. That way, everybody was covered under the original language, which did not require county residents. The new language does, and I think we're going to have to either amend it again or people, when their terms expire, will have to be a resident. But that doesn't apply now.
Does that address your concern, Dr. Gullett?
Yeah, I just wanted it to be consistent because it's still on the website is different. So that's helpful. I just want to make sure we're consistent.
Okay, thank you.
Our current members are kosher.
Right. So how do we do what you described, Naila? How do we?
I'm doing it right now.
Okay,
I know exactly where you're going, Chair Taylor. So if there's no further discussion on the bylaws, is there any further discussion from anyone else? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand. So I'd like, can someone make a motion to accept the bylaws with the amendments that Councilman McShepherd discussed? Someone needs to make that motion.
This is Danielle. I move that we accept the bylaws with the amendments that Mr. McShepherd made.
Thank you. And is there a second to that motion?
Second,
Who did I hear for? Somebody? Who did
Marcia.
Thank you, Marcia. Second. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying yes.
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 Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries and the bylaws are accepted. Let me just take an interjection, and Danielle, I apologize. I should have done this prior to discussing the bylaws, but I did want to recognize that you had joined the meeting, so thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Prior to today's meeting, the minutes of prior meetings were distributed to each of you for your review and comment. The minutes for August 11th were distributed on August 28th. The August 31st meetings were distributed on September 9th. The September 25th minutes were distributed on October 20th, and the minutes for our last meeting on November 2nd were distributed on November 9th. Can someone make a motion to approve all of the previously distributed minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Reverend Chalker. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. McShepherd. Any discussion on those minutes? Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of the minutes being accepted and approved, can you signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, that motion carries as well. Moving on, as you all are aware, earlier this month, Cuyahoga County released the findings from a disparity study, which revealed that there's a disparity between the number of available minority and women business enterprises and the number of those firms that have been awarded contracts in our county. Cuyahoga County Executive Armin Budish has provided the findings from the study to this body, as well as his Equity Commission, for review and recommendations. The disparity study has been distributed to all of the members. Chair Taylor, would you like to discuss briefly any next steps associated to that study.
Well, obviously this study is an important one, and it affirms and in so many ways confirms with exactly what we thought, that there are these disparities that continue to exist, that there are inequities around procurement, and we see them identified both for folks of color and for women. So it will have to inform our discussion and our writings going forward. I don't think any of us at this point today, unless you read it completely, are in a position to talk thoroughly about it, but it will be not only an input for what we're about to do, but we think it should inform the work going forward. I think the county executive also agrees that there's not only work to do, but this study gives him and the county council more ammunition, if you will, to make changes that can make a difference in the lives of folks who are attempting to do business with the county. So for right now, it's a study. We should break it apart, read it more thoroughly, maybe even assign segments of it if we want to go into some of the data for review. But as it stands today, it's just one more input that we are going to get our arms around. Unless there are questions, or if some folks have read it more thoroughly and want to talk about it. Well, I see Danielle is taking yourself off mute. Please go ahead.
I have a question, I guess, regarding the study. And I mean, thinking about how it came together, I wonder if there would be value in this group having a chance to engage with the firm that worked on this study. While there's value in a written document, there's also the process of engaging with the team that was able to pull that together, and just wondering what value might we derive from being able to have a chance to engage with them directly. And then also really thinking about how we use the information in the study to put some needed pressure on certain areas of our county government to be able to move forward on doing things. So I definitely agree with your statement that there's going to be a data set that we can use from the study that helps us inform decisions. But I would just offer what value we might derive from being able to have some one-on-one time with the team that pulled this together.
I don't have an answer for that, so I'm going to punt. I don't know if Naila or the county executive.
I guess I'm catching the football, but I'm indicating a fair catch, so I'm going to punt also. I believe, so I think it's a very good question, Danielle. Obviously, I don't know the intricacies and the availability of that being an option at this point. I will defer to Executive Budish and get his thoughts on that possibility. Executive Budish?
It's certainly a possibility. I should probably give a little bit of background, just I can address part of your question, Danielle. The study comes about basically every 5 years. We did one 5 years ago, and the study came out and showed disparities, as you might expect. The law has certain requirements and limitations as to what you can do, and the study forms a basis for what we're allowed to do as a county government. Because that was the study at the time, I think that was the first study that was done, we were limited in what we could do to improve the results. We were limited to, forget the right wording, but it had to be neutral, basically.
Race neutral program, so that would not fall under, that would be okay under a strict scrutiny standard.
Right, so it had to be basically race, gender neutral. So we put in programs, we did about half a dozen resolutions or executive orders, which put in some, goals, put in, targets, we actually stretched a little beyond what normally you're allowed to do. We put in some backwards looking language so that we could give extra procurement points, if you will, to companies that had proven in the past that they had hired minorities and had used minority subcontractors, but it was limited. And it was pretty apparent that it was going to be limited and not, I recall talking to the law department and saying, this doesn't sound like it's going to get us a whole lot. And the answer was probably not, because of what the law requires. So we put it into place, and unfortunately, what we predicted came true. It didn't get us a lot. A second study now gives us more teeth, gives us the ability to put more teeth behind our efforts. So that's a very good thing. And the results of the study, in my view, are very helpful for us. The study did come up with 8, I believe, recommendations, specific recommendations, which I'd like you all to look at and give us your input on those recommendations. And if you have additional ones, that'd be great. And if you are opposed to any of them or changing any of them that were in the study, we can talk about that as well. But that would be very helpful. And I would like to do that sooner rather than later. In terms of getting the group that did this in, our contract runs out in 3 weeks, basically, and at the end of the year. And there are additional costs to bring them in. So that is one consideration. But we can certainly discuss that. I'm happy to talk about it with anybody and decide where we go.
So
thank you for that.
If we don't bring them in, does it also cost to engage them over the phone?
Yeah, well, it's a little less experience. Good point. When the contract was set up, it was cost to both have them discuss it and come in. I assume we would save the come in costs, but we'd still have some. I think it's like $12,000 to bring them to a meeting, even by phone.
So I just wonder, and look, they're in the business of making money. I get it, but the request, I think, can be made, to Danielle's point. Ask just if you describe how this council exists, if they'd be willing to have a half-hour conversation, a 45-minute conversation with members. If they say no, then we have an answer. It's free, of course, as a part of the package. We don't want you to incur additional costs. And if the answer is no, then we'll figure it out from there. But hopefully someone on your staff can make the request and we can satisfy at least this request of the council. But we'll accept either answer. Hopefully it is affirmative, however. Danielle, will that in part answer your question? The other thing is I'd like for, I was gonna have the subcommittee chairs do this, but I think we can open it up to County Executive Budish's point. Those recommendations, the suggestions, we were gonna talk about as a small group. We didn't think it was appropriate to talk about that amongst the 17 of us today, which is why I attempted to defer, but a notice will come out as we talk about this study as a single agenda topic coming up.
So I think that one of the things, Chair Taylor, that I think about being on the other side of the fence as a consultant, that sometimes when someone's reading your written work, there are things that you might have pushed further to do that don't necessarily make it into the document. And so I would love to hear some perspective from them as they really conducted this study, the things that were landed on, if there's any areas that we should be kind of aware of, that maybe there's opportunity for us to help, move the ball a little bit forward, since we're using football analogies here in conversation. But I think that being able to get them maybe to even agree that if we are not able to conduct the meeting in December under the terms of their contract, is there an opportunity to schedule one date in January based on the time frame that was already negotiated?
I can make those questions. I can ask those questions.
Okay. All right. Very good. We will find an answer to that. Again, that'll be up or down, but I do want the group to talk about the study itself, and we will schedule that. All right. Naila, you want to move on?
Yes, sir. We're going to move on now to our subcommittee chair reports, and I'm going to start with Phyllis. So Subcommittee Chair Harris, would you like to provide an update on your subcommittee's work and the status of the information gathered during the community conversations, please?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. In general, I feel as if our communications efforts are growing and getting better and better. The subcommittee, communications subcommittee met on November 20th before our holiday break. where we were able to take a look at the updates on the website, the Fight Racism pages that went live or going live. We looked at all of the sections, Get Engaged, the latest updates, and what each section would provide for individuals to review and also participate in, as a way to participate in what's happening at this level as we're doing this work. In addition to that, we wanted to follow up from our community conversations by way of ensuring that we can redistribute the survey. And so the survey has been reviewed and will be added as well for participation in getting additional feedback. I'm really appreciative of the challenge and also the opportunity as we are figuring out new ways for folks to communicate and to market and share what we're doing and to be transparent during COVID. It's hard not to think about, you know, what would be possible if we were able to gather and be in front of individuals and through the opportunities that happen throughout the county. But I think our best bet so far has been to do exactly what is happening currently, which is making sure we have updated and relevant information about the work that's happening on our website, that we continue to figure out when the best modes of communication and targeted audiences, that we're not forgetting that we're talking about the broader county, and that means a lot of folks. And so our website is great. Our opportunity to meet with other groups and organizations that are interested in the work and want to let us know how they can help, like legal aid and other places, is great. Our blogs will be circulated among Laura, Nayla, and myself for review, so that we can, again, ensure that information is being transparent and updated regularly. We're looking at other places where we know that there's challenges around the digital divide and how we'll get surveys to folks like libraries and food banks. So where people are already connecting for other services, can we put information in? And so really some good thought happening around how to get the survey and information to people, and also to how to put together more universal community conversations, like a toolkit of sorts to be able to get out to organizations. And I think I answered what I'm supposed to, address what I'm supposed to. Any other subcommittee input? Communications?
Okay. Any questions for Councilperson Harris and/or her subcommittee?
I have a question. I believe the answer is yes, because Eliza's staff and others have worked so hard. Do you guys have all that you need to execute on this plan? Because communication will be such a big part of it as we not only roll out the first writing, but what we do into 2021. Are you guys in a pretty good place?
Continue to be revealed what the needs are. So I wouldn't want to say, you know, we're definitely headed in the right direction. I feel the support from the staff in terms of ideas that we bring and watching them materialize by way of information on the website, and really listening to the committee members who have diverse perspectives. Victor, Habiba, everyone brings something new in terms of what might be a blind spot around communications around this project. And I think it's still early. We're still learning how people are taking in information and wanting to give information and communicate. And, you know, as we all continue to figure out or live with the challenges around our inability to be face to face and communicate, you know, like normal. I don't know what that is anymore. But, you know, I think there might be more revealed. And so we want to be able to say, here's what we need. And I think it sounds like, you know, that model is working so far. Unless anyone else, you know, has any comments.
I just had a question, Chairwoman Harris. Did we ever decide? I think we touched on it on the last meeting, at the last meeting, about how we would respond to comments that come in between meetings that I think go directly to Naila. I don't know if the committee has a position on that, or if there's a more formal way that needs to be handled that maybe Naila could tell us about from a county perspective. But
sure. I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure if you were on the call already, that every email that comes to the, so I have 1, 2, 3 people on staff are assigned to check the equity@Cuyahoga County email box. Every email that comes to that box, we reply to the sender, acknowledging that thanking them and acknowledging receipt of the email. Additionally, if the email requests a meeting or having a conversation, I notify the chair, and he and I give, what do we say, chairperson, at least a half an hour to every single person that wants to talk with us. And we do that and we schedule that. Additionally, if I receive emails not through that equity box, but just in my role, because people know that I'm doing this, the same policy or process is followed through.
And so far we've had, forgive me, how many interviews? One.
I can't even begin to, as a chairperson Taylor has said, multiple dozens, if you include county personnel. If you don't include county personnel, in excess, I would say, of a dozen. And we have, Chairperson Taylor, what do we have? Maybe 3 or 4 scheduled for this week?
We do. We have
additionally. So
there's more, and those won't stop. But I think to Randy's point, maybe what you want to do is hear the questions asked or know what those questions are. If
so when we
don't have notes from an outside agency or notes from county personnel, what questions are coming in from the community? And maybe there should just be a way that we, unless we're already doing it, Naila, and I've missed it, but a way that we either communicate it at the start of these meetings or send an email indicating, even if there's some redundancy involved, what those questions might be, if there is input.
Yeah, I think it depends on, you know, I started thinking about things, but I think individuals like to be heard for their individual. We want to avoid the tyranny of repetition, but it's also about being heard. So I'm in agreement about thinking through more about how to bring the information to public.
You know, I hope one day when I repeat myself, someone refers to it as the tyranny of repetition. That'll make it sound so very important. So I look forward to that. So yes, we will find a way, Randy, to make sure we get those questions, repetitive or not, into the thinking, if you will, as we go forward with this work.
Very good.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else for Councilperson Harris and/or her subcommittee? Okay, seeing none, I am going to move on to Councilman McShepard. You're up. So would you like to provide us an update on your subcommittee's work, the Equitable Quality of Life Subcommittee to date?
Sure. I'll be fairly brief. Obviously, all of us can talk for hours about all of the conversations that we're having. I want to first of all just thank the subcommittee members and Chairman Taylor and others that have just made the time to be a part of these. Having been a part of many of these conversations, I can say that I'm impressed with all of the council members. They're really dialed in. It's not easy when all of us have full-time jobs, families, other responsibilities to sort of zero in and really be present. And I think that this team has been very present and respectful of the time given to us by county leaders and other community leaders. I've enjoyed immensely, just getting to know a little bit more about how the sausage is made, quote unquote. We have had a busy month with a wide-ranging number of individuals that we've spoken to, including Dr. Kaver from RTA. We partnered up with the Economic Opportunity Committee to talk to Chief Ted Carter. We also, our committee had a couple of conversations with some human services leaders, Dr. Leon Harris and Sabrina Roberts. And to the point that Chairman Taylor was making, we're starting to get that outreach where outside entities are starting to reach out to us. I was invited to sit in on a session that I believe Chairman Taylor was contacted about, to speak with the director of NEOC, Northeast Ohio Council or Commission on the Homeless. And that was quite a fascinating conversation, because it really, I think, illuminated for me, the many different aspects of the county that touches homelessness. To start to think that way for my subcommittee, I think is very important, because it is equitable quality of life, and we're trying to figure out transportation, housing, food access, et cetera. So those conversations have been quite helpful. And we have one coming up this week with the Fair Housing Working Group, which is a group of housing organizations that reached out to me to ask, hey, would your committee be willing to talk to us? And it turns out that that committee is working very closely with the Coalition on the Homeless. And they have some similar ideas about things that this committee and the county should be considering, including a few pretty direct recommendations, which I appreciate. So,
Randy, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I thought the NEOC conversation was striking for a number of reasons. But the criminalization of the homeless, many times that
right.
takes place, and there were a few other things that I thought that we were asked to focus on. You don't have to go through an entire commentary, but can you just talk a bit about the criminalization piece of the homeless, and maybe one or two other things that you found?
Just, the woman, Molly, I guess is her name, the executive director, was sort of talking about some of the issues that they take on as the organization, Northeast Ohio Coalition for the Homeless. And she kept talking about tenant rights. And I sort of remembered yesteryear, there was an organization called Cleveland Tenants Organization, and it sounded very much like what she kept referring to was what that organization did. So I asked the question, hey, are you doing the same work as CTO, which is what that organization was called? And she said, well, Cleveland Tenants is no longer, they're now defunct. So they have sort of stepped in the role of coordinating a lot of, and there were a myriad of issues that she kept referring to around landlord-tenant issues, which of course leads to an overabundance of people becoming homeless when they get kicked out of their homes. And we talked about the fact that African-American women by far are evicted X times more than any other demographic in America. And we even talked about a book called Evicted. If you haven't read it, it's a very powerful book. And so that was one piece that was really interesting, to really understand landlord-tenant relations and who's advocating for those tenants and what practices and policies might the county think about as it relates to that issue. She also talked about criminalization of homeless and the fact that organizations like Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Joe Marinucci is a good friend of mine, Leadership Cleveland classmate. So he obviously feels he has a job to do to keep the streets of downtown, free and clear from anyone that might be panhandling or otherwise harassing the average passerby. But there are homeless people that are just sort of going about their way, that sometimes feel that they're unnecessarily and unfairly targeted by police and sort of shoot away when maybe they're just going about their day, and maybe they do have a couple of dollars in their pocket and they can buy a cup of coffee if they were just given the chance, So NEOC lobbies, on behalf of that population for those kinds of issues. There also was, I believe, Chairman Taylor, a Bill of Rights for homeless that they were suggesting that we take a look at. It's actually been crafted, but they want the council to take a look at it, just to maybe have the county adopt some type of a Bill of Rights for certain practices, equitable practices that might be taken into account for homeless people.
Yeah.
So it was just a fascinating conversation. I think you agree, Eddie, that it just opened up a lot of different things that you just don't think about every day, but you start to understand that this really is a quality of life issue that we should be thinking about. And I think that is what will make these conversations more rich as we start to span out and talk to more organizations. We're going to get more specific information about specific issues that certain demographic groups face. And hopefully we'll listen.
Right. So part of the reason I wanted you to talk about this, because I knew last week that, it struck your interest, but that conversation led just now to another 10 minutes in terms of how we expanded upon this quality of life discussion. And my point is, we're going to have 10 of those per subject, right? Whether it's the criminal justice system or quality of life, we can't do it all. So we have to find a way, once again, and we'll get to this in the end, to touch on these things, because this is such an important piece that Randy just talked about. But we could spend entire chapters and verse, right, on this alone, unless I got those backwards, on this alone. So we just have to be mindful of that, because this is an important topic. We can't let a single topic consume us for now, because the work is broad. But I found it fascinating as well. I'm sorry, go ahead and continue, Randy.
No, that pretty much wraps it up. Just looking forward to continuing the meetings and the conversations, and I'm sure we'll have much more to talk about the next time we convene as a group as well. So thank you. Unless there's any other comments that my fellow committee members would like to make. If not, we can move on.
Any other questions for Councilmember McShepard or his committee? Okay, seeing none. Yes.
This is Ken Chalker, right? I could not agree more that all these subcommittee reports would involve us in many, many things. For instance, my church for 12 years was the county's homeless shelter for women and kids, 24/7. And the issues we encountered there had everything to do with criminalization, but also mental health issues, children going to school, the accessibility to that, and all the places in which persons could access support systems. We even had situations develop in the county homeless effort where other police departments, for instance, in the county, were dropping off homeless people in their communities into the city of Cleveland so that they didn't have to deal with them. And this compounded all the issues about which we all know about and are speaking.
Well said, Reverend Chalker.
Thank you for that, Reverend. We're going to turn now to the India Pierce-Lee has joined us. Welcome, India. I neglected to do that earlier, but welcome. But I'm now going to turn to you and ask if you would provide a subcommittee report on on the Criminal Justice Subcommittee, the subcommittee that you're chairing, please.
So thank you. I'm sorry I had a previous commitment, of course. We've learned a lot. I think since our last meeting, we have since had interviews now with Judge Thomas O'Malley, as well as the Deputy Chief County Prosecutor Michael O'Malley. And then our last interview last week was with the Sheriff David Schilling and Deputy Chief Brian Smith. And as you know, a lot of this that we look at, again, it's very complex, the systems, how they are intertwined, and some very siloed and disconnected in how they operate. And I think that's going to be the challenge, trying to figure out where to start and where do we begin to work at that. And when we think about equitable quality of life, right? The criminal justice system is deeply rooted into people's quality of life around jobs, homelessness, health, safety, everything. And so I think some of the findings, and our group is meeting December 2nd to begin vetting out what we've heard, some of the areas we think that we might want to focus on. and gaps that of information we still need. So I know we've been asking for data from various sources. In addition, I don't know if Phyllis or others talked about this, when we had legal aid, Colleen Cotter, come on to talk about some of the work they're doing, the right to counsel around evictions and some of the, how they represent individuals in the system, not in the criminal justice system, but on the civil side, and how they can be a resource to all of our subcommittees, to this committee as a whole, given the depth of the work they do and having legal counsel and how their programs are tied to the Lead Safe program, the right to counsel for evictions and homelessness, and some of those things. So just really trying to, put it all together and then work from the template that we just got to begin thinking about our report to the larger committee. Now, I don't know if anybody from our committee want to add anything additional, Reverend Chalker or Rabbi Caruso. Okay.
Okay, any questions for the Criminal Justice Subcommittee? Okay, hearing none, I'll move on. Heidi, you're up.
Thank you so much.
The Health and Healthcare Subcommittee, Dr. Heidi Gullett, would you like to provide sort of an update on your committee's work, please?
Sure. So we have concluded all of the interviews that we have scheduled. Our committee had a discussion about interviewing the CEOs of the 5 health systems in Cuyahoga County. We did attempt to schedule with at least one of those CEOs and we're unsuccessful. But I actually think it's probably good to consider those interviews after the first of the year, given the COVID surge that we have right now, because I think what we really need them to do is focus on the bigger picture and on racial equity and how their hospitals contribute or address that. And so I think that it's okay, as much as I'm disappointed in not getting those now, I do think we need them to have a very present time with us when we do have those. But I will say that as part of the county health improvement plan, I was able to meet with all of the hospital leads that are part of that. And one of our key aligned strategies between the health departments, United Way, several other social service agencies, and all 5 hospital systems is a commitment to eliminating structural racism in Cuyahoga County. And so this morning I was able to get an update on each of those hospital systems and the activities that they have, including their own declarations of racism as a public health crisis, as well as the organizational efforts that they've made over the course of 2020. So I think that's a nice baseline. I have, that just happened this morning, so I have yet to share that with the other members of the subcommittee, but I think that is helpful. And that's all within the context of our larger health improvement plan that is focused on eliminating structural racism from a health perspective. The other thing is that I wanted to highlight when Randy was talking earlier, I knew I was going to have a few minutes to talk, so I waited, but I think that in each of the subcommittee reports, you see that we have, as Chair Taylor was saying, we could spend a whole 2-hour meeting on one subpart of what we've learned. But I do think that we're finding themes. And as I dig into the interviews for the ones I was able to attend and the notes for those that I wasn't, I'm realizing that there are a lot of similar themes and there are a lot of systems issues that resonate in each of these areas that we're working. And so health is intimately tied to everything all the other subcommittee chairs have said today. And so it seems like there are potentially some policy levers that we could focus our energy on and actually be really impactful in multiple of these subcommittee areas. We just need to figure out exactly where those are. And to that end, we had yet another meeting this morning of the core model building team that's been working on the community health improvement plan. And we're able to further work on the model that you've seen presented previously. And I'll defer any additional comments to Peter. But what I really just want to impress upon the group is that I'm seeing a lot of synergy in the work that each of us are doing. And I think one of the really amazing parts about this, and I echo things that Randy said earlier about the commitment and the vision and just this group really working well together from the beginning. But we're also finding ways to reach out to others who are tied to county government work and really think about how we can have impact. And so part of my hope is that what we've found now can then springboard us into work in a strategic way after the first of the year. So yes, we're going to have this report, and yes, we're going to share what we found, and yes, we have recommendations, but it also gives us a really good idea of how these things are connected for the next set of work that we're going to do in the coming months next year. So I'm very encouraged by that as well. So those are the main things. There's another piece of this around COVID that I think highlights a big part of these issues, and I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but I have put together a subtext for this report that sort of shows how COVID has really blown wide open the inequities that we see around race and the other systems issues that we've identified in this series of interviews. And so I think it's a case study in recognizing how all of this is amplified in the midst of an emerging infectious disease, and why it's all the more important that this work that we're doing not be sidelined and not be slowed down by the impacts of the pandemic, but rather we're pushing forward even harder because we now see even more of an issue for folks of color in our community. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
So thank you, Heidi. Do appreciate it. Go ahead, Naila.
No, I was just going to say, I was just thinking about what you said, Heidi, and sort of thinking about the COVID, how COVID interplays in all of this. I was just digesting it, but thank you for that very thorough update. Go ahead, Eddie.
I was just filling it in. I was filling it in. Please call on who's next. I think we've got Steve.
We do. And any questions though for Heidi or her committee before we move on to our final update? Okay, seeing none. Subcommittee Chair Cabinet.
Naila,
yes,
Naila,
Reverend.
Can I ask a question?
Of course you can. Yes, please do.
The subcommittee, Heidi's report, which was very good. What about, will we have any input or reaction to how the vaccine will be distributed to people in our community that don't have access to things, and how, I mean, can we make sure or help to make sure that in the plans for distribution of a vaccine, people will not, the equity issue is not going to count them out or put them at greater risk? Do we have any thoughts about being involved in that in any kind of preemptive way?
So Heidi, that's a great question. Heidi, I know we've talked internally here about possibly 2 locations, I believe you probably know better, in the Cleveland area that are going to start to have the vaccine when it becomes available. But do you want to speak to that issue?
Sure, Reverend Chalker, thank you very much for that question. So equity has been a critically important driver in the way that we have managed the COVID-19 response at the Board of Health, as well as at our colleagues at the Cleveland Department of Public Health. And that really has been a guide for the way we've managed testing and the way we work with County Executive and his team around the funding that he gave us, and ensuring that we're using that in a way that equitably offers testing in places where people weren't receiving it. And we feel the same way about the vaccine. So we used the work we've been doing, and we have an equity advisory group internally, and we meet within the Board of Health, and we meet regularly about that group to really drive marketing, communications. You may have seen some of our recent communications around testing and around holiday gatherings and things like that. And the vaccine is the next phase of that. And so we have always had the vaccine in mind. And in fact, we now have fixed sites in the city of Cleveland and other parts of the community, so that we're both testing and then we'll be vaccinating at those locations. And then as far as the actual who gets the vaccine first? Obviously, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices nationally is meeting tomorrow, and the emergency authorizations are expected December 17th for the first 2 vaccines. But we know that all of that comes down to the local level. So we're waiting on guidance from the state, but I can assure you that if I have anything to do with the way that the vaccine rolls out locally, that equity is going to be a huge part of how we manage the strategy. And I know my colleagues at the Board of Health fully believe in that as well. So I don't have specifics to give you around that, but I can tell you that that's really important. I'm not sure, this group is really around policy, and we're, clearly guiding policy at county government level. And as you know, the Board of Health is quasi-government, but clearly this group is invested in ensuring that this emerging pandemic is addressed in an equitable way with our community.
Thank you very much, Heidi.
Thank you. Any other questions for Heidi? Okay, seeing none. Chair Cavanis, Subcommittee Chair Cavanis, you're up.
Thank you. I
Economic
appreciate it.
opportunity. Thank you.
So first, since our last meeting, we obviously had to ramp up pretty quickly, schedule meetings quickly. Certainly want to thank my fellow council members, subcommittee level, for accommodating, being so accommodating and scheduling meetings quickly. Certainly Nyla and Laura have been very supportive in getting me ramped up and certainly available whenever I need them. And then also to other subcommittee members, my co-chairs, letting us sort of piggyback on your meetings as well. I don't want to be repetitive. Certainly thematically, I would agree with my fellow chair members. Just to maybe add to what has been said, I certainly think that there's been some themes when it comes to where the county's at from a departmental standpoint when it comes to awareness of equity, what equity means. Certain departments that I would view as maybe being a little bit more innovative than other departments. I would say that everyone is at different places, but ultimately I want to sort of recognize that we're not starting at square one. I think that there's positive elements of what's going on at the county currently that certainly as we move forward through this agenda, thinking about the report being submitted, that I think we have to recognize that the county has started making efforts to make some change. And so, I'm hoping, and as we think about our recommendations, how do we not only think about the new things, the new policy changes, but also what are some ideas that leadership has that we could sort of empower them and enable sort of positive work that they're trying to do, but they might need a little push. So I think this has been really productive. I think that all of the conversations, at least I've been engaged in with leadership, with others, have been positive and transparent and we approach it not critically, right? That we're all trying to learn. Randy mentioned that it's sort of interesting to learn how the sausage is made. Systems are always complex, but I would say that there's certainly elements to this work that we'll be able to highlight in our recommendations. Hopefully, I can set up a meeting with our subcommittee this week to really dig deeper, and then hopefully use that meeting to propel us to sort of our recommendations we're planning to draft. That will be included in the report. So with that, I think that's my update. I know that others on the subcommittee have been involved in other conversations that I have not been in, so feel free to maybe add your thoughts.
Anyone else?
Stephen, and to the chair, I think one of the things that I would just, ask that we continue to think about, and I think Eddie brought it up earlier, that there will be a number of things that can creep up as issues that we should look or could look to try and take on. But if we're looking at this as something where we're investigating all of these different programs and resources that are already available, I don't think our work is centered around creating new programs and initiatives, but really saying there's all these systems. How do we evaluate whether or not there's equity built into the systems that already exist? And so instead of us somewhat getting derailed by trying to come up with a solution for every single problem, a lot of times what we, in Cuyahoga County, we are nonprofit rich. We have lots of organizations doing a lot of work. Oftentimes those organizations don't talk to each other. People don't know how to access the organizations. And so I think the power of this committee can really be to figure out how we drive the county and other systems to think about coalitions, to work across disciplines, to have better communication with residents, with service providers, so that way we can ensure that equity happens across all these different systems that can be very complex for people to navigate.
Danielle, that was superbly said. Thank you for that, because while the message I was trying to articulate didn't come across that effectively, I think that is exactly what we have to be mindful of. So here's what I'd ask. Let's take a pause, and thank you for Danielle for setting it up that way. You've heard plenty from Stephen, from Randy, from Heidi, from Phyllis, from India, from myself. For those who are on a committee and not a subcommittee chair, please want to hear your voices as well. And I won't call on folks, but we've got a number of folks who are on the line who've not necessarily had much to say today. I know in these committee meetings you've had plenty, but I just wonder, as we go through this conversation today, anything that's not settling well, we don't need to air grievances, but that you want to see done differently, or you want to see more of, or any other thoughts that have sort of crept into your thinking as we've gone through this process.
I just wanted to say quickly, if Habiba would help me out around the voice that she's brought around communicating and getting feedback from the youth in the county. And I failed to mention the executive Budish has offered to, and we'll be creating a format for young people to be able to participate and give insight as well.
Thank you, Phyllis, for just elevating the issues of youth, or the importance of youth's voices in this process. And as I've sat in the different meetings, Danielle's comments resonate with me now, because I think while we have a lot of independent and quasi-independent institutions or agencies, and they're crosswalking to one another, feels like an important aspect of this to try to support, or for our recommendations to feed into. But a key missing set of organizations are our school districts. And so not only do we need to find ways to center youth voice, or amplify youth voices as part of our communications process, I'm really stricken by the absence of school accountability and interaction with our county government. And so looking at that as a core issue comes to mind for me.
It's very important. I guess I kind of warned you when I said I wouldn't call on names, but call on folks. Between Yanela Levine and Rabbi Caruso, any others?
Can I piggyback off of what Habiba said? I'm not sure if Habiba, you were on a call, but I can't remember who I was speaking to. Maybe it was, oh gosh, Matt. I think it might have been Matt Carroll. One of the things I had brought up, and this sort of, and India knows a bit about this in terms of, and Williams does in working with CMSD, but certainly when it comes to inequities across school districts, when it comes to curriculum, accessibility, my question was really, does the county, or can the county play a role to, I don't want to say level the playing field, but at least elevate the issue, right, of that, elevate the conversation of that issue, right? And so, maybe moving forward, to Habiba's point, like, how do we build that into, our recommendations? So I agree, Habiba.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Marcia, please.
Habiba, I'd like to share with you and the rest of my council members that here is a place where the Urban League may be able to be helpful with some things that are coming up. we're going to be establishing an Institute of Equity and Excellence in Education at the Urban League of Greater Cleveland that will begin functioning in January. And one of the things is we've been working with the state superintendent and CMSD and 4 other inner ring suburban school districts. We also are going to be launching a My Brother's Keeper and a Saving Our Daughters initiative with the help of the Cleveland Cavaliers. So we'll have a network that's outside of the dependence on the school system in terms of how it's finding its way in operating with different, virtual formats and dual formats. So that's a place I think that we can be helpful in helping to reach out for that youth voice. So be happy to work with you on that and see how we can collaborate to, provide access for that.
It's an important development. Thank you for that, Marcia. Sheila, Victor, anyone else? As you sat through these conversations?
This is Sheila. Thank you, Chairman Taylor. Just listening to all the reports from the different subcommittee chairs, I think, they've pretty much touched on most of the points that I typically observe and have been just processing through this experience. I've worked most closely, obviously, with Heidi as I'm on that subcommittee for health inequities, but I think just kind of akin to what Danielle has shared and a few others, I've heard the term boil the ocean in these conversations, the interconnectedness of these different issues, particularly as our committee thinks about health, how all the other committees touch upon that: housing, education, criminal justice. So I guess if I could add anything to it, is to just think about in terms of our ultimate goal, which is to make these recommendations and to see these outcomes, how we might leverage, also our personal space. Everyone here represents some kind of affinity, some kind of resources, and how we leverage that to support the county in those recommendations, because the county can't do everything. And then also, I just think about I always think about predictors in terms of inequity, of how we can stave off those kind of realities, and also the allocation of resources. And when I think about the entire Cuyahoga County and all the different citizens within the county and where resources are spread out, I think about those areas in the county that don't have anchors, that aren't getting a lot of investment. You think of Garfield Heights, you think of different places that aren't necessarily maybe connected to hospitals or education systems. And so I just would like to kind of raise that up as we think about our recommendations, that we're mindful to zip code and how decisions are being made about resources that may not be what the county is allocating, but impacts the people of the county. So for example, again, I mentioned Garfield Heights, Maple Heights. We're finding a lot of students out there who can't take advantage of some of the programs and some of the opportunities that are rightly so being leveraged in the city of Cleveland, right? Because Cleveland has experienced, particularly the East Side, divestment for so long. But I just wanted to kind of raise that up to think about our zip code, continue to think about our interconnectedness, and think about how the weight of the people on this committee can add value, not just recommendations, to solving some of these issues. And that's pretty much my comments. So thank you for that, Chairman Taylor.
That's great commentary. Thank you. And you're right. So I do thank you for bringing that up. Rabbi Russo.
I just want to thank you, Chair, and thank everybody for their insightful comments. I think we're sort of rounding around some of the same things, which is, I appreciate what you said, Danielle, around not having to reinvent the wheel. And I think a big part of our job, I'm just thinking big picture now in the meetings that I've been to with the criminal justice group, is discernment. And that's the hard part. So we have these folks who work in the county who are coming forth with their plans, what they've done, and sharing that with us. Some of them incredibly generous of spirit to say, you know, I don't think we're doing everything right. And so I think there's a big weight on this committee to be discerning about, to be able to see things that the folks who are running departments, whatever they, you know, prosecutors, judges, what they're not seeing. And it just means when you're in it, you can't see it as clearly as when you kind of pull back. So I think there's a big, I think very kind of sacred burden that we have of discernment, to really figure out what is missing. Because I don't know if we need to create a lot of new things from what we've seen. It's just connectivity and understanding. And then I would just say the other piece is around a playbook, just creating some kind of playbook. And I don't want to make this sound too simple here, but something that those who are in positions of leadership in the county can really refer to. Say, these are my measurements, these are my metrics, this is what I should be doing. These, you know, and so there'll be some way of there's accountability and evaluation. And from the meetings that we've been in our committee, I've seen that there's no playbook. It doesn't feel like there's a playbook where I'm doing this and I see that this department, who I have a relationship with, also has that playbook. You know, there was a clear sense that there's independence going on in these departments, and a collective sense of responsibility and pride in what they do, but not necessarily a whole lot of communication and understanding, particularly around race, what they should be doing. What's my playbook? And how is everybody connected to that playbook? That could be an interesting endeavor. It feels a little daunting, but after our discernment, to be able to find some measurements, some metrics that we're going to hold every sort of organization, every leadership group to. I'm looking forward to my meeting in a couple of days with the Criminal Justice Committee, where we're going to be processing more of our meetings together. But those are just some big picture takeaways.
Again, another important comment. So thank you. Discernment is certainly a term that we should apply to the work that we're doing here. Victor, Yanela, anything to add?
I just thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Caruso. I think your statements really helped me clarify what I wanted to say. I think one of the things that struck me based on the meetings I went to and also just side conversations I've had is that, you know, the people who work at the county are also citizens of the county, and that there's needs internally that I think need to be addressed, especially for this work to be sustained over time. So, you know, just and something I heard is that a lot of times people don't realize is that county employees also intersect and interact with the systems in a variety of ways. They could be, you know, going through the criminal justice system themselves or something or other. So just something again that just I've really been thinking about is, you know, what is the work that has to happen internally within the county for this work to be successful externally? And obviously, I don't have an answer for that, but it's just something that we really need to consider, because to your point, Rabbi, they're just, and like a lot of places, because we're all learning this, you know, what's connecting, what is the playbook, how are people learning about this work? And then the other point is, you know, as a county and as a city, we still need to work on, you know, diversifying diversity. I think that we tend to be very focused, but there's just so many aspects of diversity that I don't think we're even considering yet. And I know we will, but that we just need to keep bringing it to the table. So thank you.
Fair point. Okay. Yanela, anything from you?
No, I don't want to repeat what everybody has already said. So, we just have to keep pushing forward, keep doing the work, make sure that we don't get hung up in small details, and really, I'm the person that wants to like get it done, right? And I know that we're not gonna solve every problem around inequality or injustice, but I want to make sure that the time that we're taking to do the interviews and to speak with the people that we're speaking with and getting insight from them that we're getting, that we are able to put that to use and really start to affect change.
Okay, thank you. So it's important that we get input from everyone on this council, because even though, Inela, you thought you were being repetitive, it was a perspective, a voice that we hadn't heard to this point. So everyone is bringing something unique to this discussion, and we want to make sure that we round out our thinking as we go through this work. So I appreciate everyone participating at all levels of these conversations. I'm grateful, and it's important. All right, is there a remaining before we move to Peter? And we will give Peter 15 minutes for his presentation.
Taylor, I'm sorry, I just had a question for the group. I'm just wondering, are there organizations or individuals that we might want to reach out to, or is that an appropriate thing to be doing? I'm thinking of the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio, where school districts are connected, the Lake Erie Native American Council. I don't want to create an imbalance where it looks like we're cherry picking who we are seeking to speak to, but though those organizations may not have reached out to us, is it sanctioned to reach out to them?
I think you've just added those to the list, and then we will we'll find out what we can along the way. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, but one of the things I've been thinking about is a whole host of folks. I think, I'm not sure which committee member said it at a previous meeting, but it's sort of concentric circles. We started with county government, and then we've gone to quasi county government, and then we've gone even further out. So it seems like there are multiple rings out that we really need to thoroughly discuss with, understand perspectives, get input. And so in my mind, I'm really trying to think about what that timeline looks like for those next group of folks after the first of the year. I'm not to say there aren't people we can't talk to between now and the end of December, but really trying to be strategic in thinking about making sure everyone's voice is heard, and knowing that we can schedule that out over the coming months has been really helpful to me, not to feel like we've got to rush and get it all in and then, leave people out.
Agreed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We have to remember that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. This is a long-term proposition for all of us, and we should stage our work and know that a year from now, we'll still be talking to new organizations, and we should be, and we shouldn't try to shoehorn everything into the first quarter of 2021. So keep that in mind. And I did want to ask, maybe Naila and even county executive can get back to us, but as we wrap up the internal county leadership interviews and meetings, are there any glaring omissions that you can think of? Are there any department heads or departments that we have not spoken to that have fallen off the radar for some reason? I mean, should we be talking to the coroner, or should we be talking? I don't know. I'm just, there's departments that fall in the purview of the county that we haven't talked to yet, and that we've never mentioned. And I'm just curious to know if there are any glaring omissions that we should be mindful of before
like the clerk of courts.
Like the clerk of courts.
Yeah. that was intentionally done, by the way. We intentionally left that position out.
I will. Let me take that, Mr. McShepard. Let me look at who we've gotten to. I can also talk to Armin, because he doesn't know the extent of folks that we have spoken with, the executive, and get back to you. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
And at least I can, if at minimum, at least provide a list of those who you have not spoken to, and you all can see if you would like to speak with them.
But also inherent in that question is a point someone raised before. We've talked to the leadership, we've talked to the heads, the chiefs, the deputies. Is there a level 2 or 3 down where without impunity, we can speak to some folks who are living this without necessarily being in charge of a department or an area? So it's just something to think about as we go forward in this work. Okay. Thank you for that. Peter, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Taylor. Let me just share the screen. So last time I shared the just an overview of a map that's evolving, and there's also a request to maybe focus in on a specific system. So I'll show an example from the interview notes that I drew from from the interviews that's focused on jail bond reform, and echoing many of the points that came up earlier. There certainly are some themes that are cutting across systems in terms of issues. There are also themes about some really common issues within organizations and units that cut across both county government and organizations. So that's an interesting possibility. And a lot of mention, particularly within county government, of issues around strategic alignment and paying attention to strategic strategy. What is the strategy and so forth? So those are just some things I caught in reading the interview notes. I thought it was useful just to give you a visual about where the content is coming from and where it's going. So on the left, you see that I've broken the interviews down by subcommittees, where they're coming from in terms of the ones that have been completed and shared. As of last night, there are 2 more that came in this morning. They're not included in here. And then prior reports. And on the right are the categories, the large big buckets that they're being organized into: actors, goals, policies, solutions, and variables. And I'll say a little bit more about that. So for actors, that would include organizations, individuals, different units, and so forth. And you can see they're being drawn from all the interviews they're bringing and contributing equally. People are talking a lot about goals, and this is coming up in the interviews, which is really fantastic. People being very explicit about what the goals are and how they want to change them. So that's actually both encouraging and something to think about. People are referring to policies, and of course that's also been talked about in previous reports. And what I found especially inspiring reading through the interview notes were the amount of solutions. I think Stephen and others have mentioned this too. There's just a ton of solutions that people are suggesting. There's duplication across interviews, but there's something on the order of at least 70 solutions, things people are working on, things that they're proposing for change. So that's worth looking at. And then the variables are the actual content of these maps, and there's about 300 of those now. Again, there's some duplications. This is pretty preliminary. So I thought I'd dive in and just show you one example from the interviews that's focusing on bond reform. So this is the text that's being coded in. So folks talking about the ability to pay bond, which is a function of bond amount and income. And then the bond amount is a function of the recommendation. And the recommendation currently is being influenced by job stability, employment, and arrest history. And employment's also influencing job stability and income. And there's a lot of discussion across the notes also about how arrest and criminal histories as a barrier to employment. Ability to pay bond is also influencing. So when folks are not able to pay bond, they're missing job, they're losing employment. So that comes up as part of the interviews. And then the impact that this has in terms of on families, and then subsequent effects in terms of arrest and recidivism. So this is one part of what's coming out in the interviews. I just want to flag that. And there are a number of feedback loops here. For example, there's an income feedback loop here. So bond recommendations leading to bond amount, ability to pay bond, employment, which influences income, and bond recommendation, ability to pay, job stability, employment, and criminal history, and then family disruption. So these are all the loops. Now, one of the things that's interesting here already as people are talking about solutions is that there are different solutions have different types of leverage. So there's some that might be less effective and others that are more effective. And many of the solutions actually cut across these. And just to illustrate this, based on what was already being discussed in some of the interview notes, just in this one example, drawing on Meadows' framework, and I think I can share this document as well. I think it might have been shared earlier, but this is a useful, if you're looking for more background where this is coming from. So constants, parameters, so something like just lowering the bond requirement would be an example of modifying the constants or parameters. And it's often seen as sort of a less effective place to intervene in the system. Bail assistance comes up as part of the narrative. So that's actually an example of changing the size of buffers relative to flows, relative to somebody's income. And that's more effective than just lowering the bond requirements. Changing the structure of material flows. There's a lot of discussion about diversion, and diversion not only increasing people from services, but also decreasing how people are actually showing up in arrest and accumulating criminal history. So this is changing the how people are moving through a system. And there's actually really nice literature. There's actually discussion about this, both in the notes about preventing children and youth moving into adult court, but there's actually a really nice evidence-based literature about ways that diversion works. The delays, so these double arrows here reflect delays, so that becomes another type of leverage point. You can think about shortening or increasing the delays. There's a mention in some of the notes, take income out of the equation for figuring out bond recommendations. So if you remove that link, you actually remove that balancing feedback loop. That's changing the structure of the system. That's generally more effective or stronger than trying to modify the delays or any these other items up here. Likewise, changing the information flows. So no longer, things you can do to mitigate or prevent criminal history from being a barrier to employment is removing this link, which is removing that information flows. And then a lot of things that we've talked about and previously that's come up in conversations and I've presented, but things like the goals and the values of the systems and certainly in the notes, perspective transformation, they would all live down here. But I just thought this was a really nice example of how the interviews are translating into structure along with the solutions mapping in. And the solutions that are being mentioned aren't just of one type. They actually tap into different types of leverage points with different degrees of strength. So I don't know if there are questions on this specific slide. This is not really distinguishing bond reform from bail reform. It's sort of being collapsed, but that's a function of just the way the interview notes are coming across.
Can you go back to the, when you pulled out or called out the family disruption?
Yeah.
You had it.
Well, I guess this one will work, right?
Yeah, we had it sort of isolated, but yeah, this one.
Yeah, oh, I can pull that one out. This one, I think. Yeah. And family disruption may not be the right name for this one.
Okay, I just wanted to take another look at it because obviously so much of this is the devastation created inside of the family and then the generational issues and all the other consequences that arise. So I think perhaps we'll talk about it more, but this one is particularly interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it can all. So I just want to better understand it. All right. Well, I have more slides, Peter, at this point.
No, I just wanted to give an example of how the one to emphasize that the quality of the interviews, the richness of that content relative to previous reports, and we're talking about reports that go back 5 years longer, back into the late 60s, that the content that's coming out from those interviews is actually very, very rich in terms of both understanding the system and the solutions that are being discussed. A number of you have already talked about that. We don't necessarily need to do more, but in terms of recommendations, but it's connecting, that's coming out very strongly. and then we can have system maps like this with solutions mapped in as you're developing that.
Danielle, I think Danielle has a question, but let me say two things then. Danielle, the floor is yours. First, we will find a way to use, with Peter's permission and others, find a way to use some of this mapping inside of our first report, but it's like all the other reports, it'll grow, it'll evolve, and it'll be improved over the course of time. And then the second thing is, while we may not realize it now, this, because it's got so many, so much input included, and it's got so many ways in which we can change, disrupt, or affect the system noted, it will be critical. It will last, quite honestly, through all of our reporting. And that roadmap that, or playbook that was described earlier by Rabbi Caruso, I believe, is contained in here as well. So yes, we want the words, we want to narrate, but we also want to provide opportunities for folks to take this mapping out, look at it on its own, and know that not only did good thinking go into the work and the interviews, but here is an opportunity to create reform and change that is illustrated in such a logical way. So again, we may not appreciate it now, but this will be an important part of the work when it's all said and done. I'm sorry, Danielle.
I had a question, I guess, in regards to how this mapping is done. Is there any ability to call out things that specifically tied to equity? I mean, I look at this whole narrative and look at family disruption, criminal history, all of these things. Are we able to also highlight and pinpoint this is how equity also is amplified in these situations, or the lack thereof?
Yes, absolutely. So we could describe this as a structure. So this is sort of a structure, but it's differentially impacting people, and that's how equity comes in, and be very explicit about the disproportionality. It may also, this is essentially saying it's one structure, but it's impacting people in very different ways. And you add in the biases and so forth. It's also possible, and there may be situations where we want to call in, where you want to draw it out more explicitly, where you could actually illustrate how the structure, it is a different structure, that the inequities are involving different sets of feedback loops. So there's one group of folks are experiencing one set, and another group are just experiencing barrier after barrier after barrier, is one example of that. And there may be reasons to visually want to depict it that way, because then the trick in that is you want to eliminate those structures, or you want to create more supports as a safety net, as an example. So that's a choice. That's up to how folks want to do this. And I try to bring those questions to you and to the core modeling team as they arise. Anyway, I really appreciate the question.
And Danielle, I also wanted to add that this is one small map among the larger Cuyahoga County map around how structural racism is impacting the community. So that's also that larger color-coded map that Peter showed at the beginning. This is just one small piece. And so this is from the interviews, that's from a group modeling process, but it's a much bigger piece. So that's also how you can link it back in to show all of the different systems of racism, structural racism in particular, in our community, that's grounded in our community, and how it's impacting individuals. So that's an important part of this. Thanks for bringing that up.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
One question I had is, we put this in the report, how do we put this in a context that others looking at this that aren't in these meetings, learning from you, Peter, how to decipher this so that they can understand what they're looking at? I think this would, to most people, I mean, I think it's great, but if you're not studying this and learning about, how do you transfer this knowledge and information to the people outside of here?
Great question, Peter, Heidi. We're going to do it in bits. First of all, I think we're going to do it in small doses, right? I'm not suggesting this work go into the first report, but please, Peter, go ahead. You and Heidi.
So the way I would suggest thinking about that is multiple documents. So there's some briefing report or policy brief, that actually never has any diagram. It just has the words. It has the stories and the clarity about what to do. When there's a diagram like this, especially in a report, there's got to be a narrative, and you can understand everything in the diagram that is already, just from the narrative without knowing the conventions. And then ideally, there's a correspondence between the narrative and the diagram. So if one understands part of that story from a particular lived experience and one can look at the diagram, what often happens is people realize, yeah, that was my story, or I remember when that happened, or my family was impacted that way. Then people actually are pretty able to read the rest of the diagram, even if they don't have experience in that part of the system. So that corresponds. That's true for presentations as well. And for any of these diagrams, what I'm happy to, what I often do is write up some text, some draft text, and then people can work from that and decide what they want to include and not. And then feedback on the diagrams, like like Chairman Taylor, like not seeing, sometimes people find the big diagram is really helpful. Like this is a really complex system and that's what they want to communicate. Sometimes folks want something that's much more focused on part of a solution and to be able to illustrate that story. So that's got to be feedback and say, I'm happy to, produce that, or if you say that's not useful or can you bring it down, that's all sort of valuable input from my point of view.
Thank you.
I really like it as an educational piece because I think it gets to educating people about structural racism and the systems that exist. And then when they see themselves through these many structures or these many models, it also helps to support people in not and doing things and maybe even planning or even calling out that I'm in this cycle. This is not just about me and my inability to pull myself up by my bootstraps. Like I hope that in these models and in this narrative, there's going to be a wide range of folks who see, particularly Black and Brown folks and other people who are marginalized, who see where their story is in here. I know I'm going to see my story in this as this continues to be, as this continues to evolve. And so I really am hopeful that it is a document that is really well used by our entire community. Like, so as we're thinking about this and building it and creating it, that we actually do the communications part in a way that is going to be useful for folks around the solutions and recommendations we're going to be making.
So Danielle, Phyllis, and India, thank you so much for those comments. That sort of breathes life into this work for me, quite honestly. I didn't do any of it. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Heidi. But that's exactly what we're talking about. If folks can see themselves in these loops somehow after it's narrated, because so many times people are visual and we can put it in very small elements or chunks. And I think that is a great outcome. So I do hope that as this evolves, not everyone will read everything, but if they see it illustrated and there's a chance to make a change and adjustment, what more can we hope for, right, out of this? All right, any other questions for Peter at this point?
Chair Taylor, I'd just like to add one more thing. In our group model building this morning, we had a really helpful conversation about power and privilege. And so I just also want to highlight that I do think that this is a tool for folks who have particularly white privilege in this context, but who also have power differentials and find themselves on the upper end of those power differentials, to also see how they fit into the system and how they may be exerting power in a way that reinforces inequities, or how changing a power differential or changing the way you handle privilege, or recognizing you have white privilege to begin with, and the power that comes along with that may also affect folks. So I'm hoping that this is a tool that's powerful for a lot of different people in our community, and particularly people who are in positions of power that make policy and can then see themselves in that as well. So it was a helpful conversation, I think, this morning with that. And it's been a couple sessions we've had that, but I just wanted to make sure I pointed that out too.
Okay, thank you. So let's just briefly, really briefly talk about the report drafting. So much of this work will be done at the subcommittee chair level, but everyone has a role to play. We've talked about it. So the subcommittee chairs should meet with their committees, should begin talking about this, and the writing should commence within the next week. There are templates that have been circulated to the subcommittee chairs. I think those went out earlier today. We should probably just share them with everyone, quite honestly, if we haven't done so already, Naila and Laura, so they can see exactly what we're after. Use those templates. So just so we manage expectations, I think this first report, let's put any attachments or addenda aside, including the mapping process. The expectation is somewhere between, we've got 4, let's call it 5 subcommittees at this point. Communications will undergird all of this. So the expectation is that this writing is somewhere between 5 and let's call it 30 pages in length, right? So you've got a low end where you can give us one page of goodness, quite honestly, or you can amp it up to about 6 to 10 pages, because not everyone will be the same in terms of how prolific they are from a writing standpoint, nor have as much to say. But I do want to keep that expectation on the low end intact, but I want it to be good work if that's what we come up with. And on the high end, please don't try to supply at this point more than about 10 pages. And we will talk about summaries and what's next and things of that sort. If you want to go beyond that, folks, we should talk about it because there's more to come and we don't have all the answers at this point. I'm open to feedback and pushback, if you will. So for the next couple of minutes, any response to what happens next from a drafting standpoint?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think if it's really long, people won't read it. So we need something that captures the essence and the summary of what we have and where we're headed, but also not so long that people just look at it and go, I can't do that. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Just from a timeline perspective, I just wanted to make sure as a group we talk about the timeline and allow time for synthesis. So what was your timeline that you want to submit by so that we can make sure we're working backwards?
Well, I've given ourselves the 15th of December, okay. Which is why I tried to manage those expectations. I'm going to craft an executive summary, which will talk about all the work, the good work that everyone here has done. So that's not necessarily included, but let's still go with the 15th before we move headlong into the holiday season. You know, there's going to be some fluctuation, Heidi, I get that, but I'm just trying to keep ourselves to a certain deadline if possible.
No, that's great.
Okay. All right. Work to do. For the subcommittee chairs, I have the blank stares right now, but we're gonna move into it. We're gonna get it done. I'm sure of that. All right. I think we're done except for a next meeting. What do you want to advise here, Naila?
That's correct. Do you all want to, the question becomes, do we want to have a final meeting this year once the report is done and sort of, you know, ready to be disseminated, obviously, to the public and talk about it and sort of plan out for next year? Or do we want to just hold off? I know our subcommittee chairs, we're going to be meeting weekly, probably through the month of December, but really, what is your preference, folk? Okay, so Chair Taylor, what is your decision then?
I think Steve was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. So
No.
I would think we should probably have one more, just because for next year to come without us at least having a discussion of what next year looks like and getting clarity on that, I think we'd lose out on an opportunity. So that's just my recommendation.
So with that recommendation, here's what I would suggest. I would suggest that we try to, for those who can make it, and hopefully maybe we won't put any voting items on the agenda, but for those who can make it, we will do an hour only, not 2 hours. Okay, so we will try to get it in before the end of the year. We will do an hour with the full committee. We'll try to plow through this, talk about it before it's actually maybe pieces and parts, right? Maybe we won't have distributed the report, but we will talk about the goings on at that point for an hour. Does that work, Naila, or should we try to arrange this in subcommittee form?
I think that works. I would say we're going to try really hard to keep it to an hour, but maybe I'll ask for an hour and a half of your time. Is that fair, Chair Taylor?
And maybe I'll push back offline to an hour.
Okay, so it'll be an hour. We will do an hour. No need to push back offline. We will look, what do you want to do, Chair Taylor? Do you want to look to the week of Christmas, the week of the 21st? I work for the county, so there is no vacation in my life.
What do you think, folks? I know we don't want to have a full committee conversation on this, but do you want the week before or do you want that week?
Baby, you're muted. Oh, I don't know if you were talking to us.
I would say the week
So
I have a 6-year-old
before the
melting down
18th.
over here.
Before the 18th? Is that what I heard?
I think that's very, I will just say that that's very soon if your deadline is the 15th to have stuff true.
We recognize that. We recognize there's some flexibility to this deadline. So let's say before the 18th, we'll send out a date for those who can make it. Please join. And let me ask this: beginning of the day, end of the day. We'll use those guideposts as a way to structure this. Does it matter to you? Is it easier at the end of the day for most folks?
Depends on the day.
Yeah, not necessarily.
Okay.
Unless it's 7 in the morning, then it's good, but.
Yeah, 7's good.
All right, here's what we'll do. We'll try either 7:30.
Oh, no, that's not good for, that would not be good for my staff. I would have to start it, seriously, we would have to start it probably at 8:30 for, for just our purposes. I apologize for that.
I got you. So we'll try either an 8:30 or a 3:30, and we will advise, okay? Is 3:30 not good for your staff either?
No, 3:30 is good. I was looking at Laura about the 8:30. 3:30 is good.
Okay, for an hour. All right. Thank you for that negotiation. That was tough. I do appreciate it. Everyone, appreciate your time. Any thoughts before we depart?
I just want to thank everybody for all their input. Eddie, for your diligence over us, Laura and Naila keeping us on track, our bosses. But to our subcommittee members and chairs, I just want to thank you all for everything. This is a learning effort, but everybody is really working hard, and just want to know we appreciate it.
Here, here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone have a wonderful, basically 2 weeks, and I'll see you again.
We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Take care.